Hello, David Clarke here from DVC Training. I am in the middle of updating my EDIUS tutorial to have EDIUS 10 and also update some of the really old stuff like the settings and the audio part of the tutorial. The new version will be available soon from my website. Now each of my individual chapters has got a title, which looks a bit like this, which originally I made with VizTitle. Very happy with the quality of the VizTitle one, but you can see here. Now the only problem is I use several machines. I've got a couple of laptops and about 4 different desktops. And when I start moving things around, I'd have to move my VizTitle license with it to be able to use the titles. So VizTitle used to use a dongle, but now it uses a serial number, just like pretty much every other program. You can only activate it twice. You can't activate it and deactivate it that many times. So I thought, well, forget that. Instead, I'll use New Blue Titler Pro, which comes with EDIUS. I have done a tutorial about how to make this particular title with New Blue Titler Pro. It looks like this. Nothing really wrong with it. And of course that's on every machine that I've got EDIUS because it's now coming with EDIUS. But then I thought to myself, you know what? I could do that with Quick Titler. Quick Titler of course doesn't do animation, so all the animation is going to be done with EDIUS. But at the end of the day, what I've produced looks pretty much the same and is very easy to cart around and reuse. And this is it. So you can see what happens is that the 3 sections move in, and then some lens flares come up, and then they fly away again. And I'm going to show you how I did that on EDIUS. During that, we'll touch on a bit of using the layout, a bit of masking, and then how I reuse this again and again and again. So obviously the first thing I did was just to start up a new sequence in my project, and then I took one of my New Blue titles and popped it into the background, just as a reference. And what I want to do is to recreate that. So I'm going to need a few more tracks, so I'm just going to right-click on the track header and add in a couple more video tracks. And then I'm going to work on each of these individual bits. So, for a start, let's just go for the word settings. So I'm just going to press Z to mark an in and out point around that. And then I'm going to right-click here on the 2 track and say New Clip, Quick Titler. And what I need is a box with some words in it. So let's go to the rectangle tool, grab that, and drag out a box which is just about the right height. Yes, like so. And I'm going to need to change the colour of this. So I'm just going to move it out of the way slightly. And I'm going to sample the colours off here just so I get exactly the right colours. I need a gradient. It starts a bit lighter at the top and a bit darker at the bottom. I'm just going to pop down here to fill colour and go for colour number 1. Click the colour picker here. And then go all the way across to the playback window and just click at the very top of the window. And it'll sample that light sort of greeny colour for the top. For the second one, do the same thing, click, sample the colour at the bottom, and now I've got a bit of a light green and a bit of a dark green. Now my box obviously is just 1 colour, I really want it to be 2, so I've got to come up to where it says colour and change it to 2, so it uses both of those colours, and then I've just got to take the direction here and swivel it around so that's at the bottom. It's set to be 50% transparent, and I don't want it 50% transparent, I want it completely opaque, so I'm going to put that down to 0. And there we are, I've now got a box which is basically the same colour as that one. I can't slant it because this thing only lets me do rectangles or triangles. So I'm going to put the slant on it in a different way. So let's just put it over the top of the word settings. I'm also at this point going to add in the words. So I'm just going to click and type settings. This is in impact. It's a little bit smaller, I'm not entirely sure which. Let's just go down here and work it out. There we are, that's about the size I want for that particular box. I don't want an edge, but I do want a shadow, because I've got a little subtle shadow on there, which I think just helps to make it stand out a bit. So I'm going to click on that, I'm going to make it black, probably just about the right angle, but it's not close enough. So let's come down to the width here and just move it until it gets to the kind of closeness that I want. Yep, that's not bad, and maybe a little bit transparent. So yeah, I've now got the same kind of look. Incidentally, in Quick Titler here, I'm getting the thing to look exactly how I want it to be because I went up to View and clicked Preview Mode. So one of the first things I ever do when I start a system with Quick Titler is just to go and select Preview Mode. After it's ticked, it'll stay in that all the time. If it's not in Preview Mode, it looks a bit fuzzy and it's a bit hard to judge stuff. But there we are, I've now created that box with the word settings behind it. Now I'm going to save the title. So I could just go File and Save, but I'm moving around between different computers. Some of my computers have got 4K screens and some of them have got HD screens, and the actual scaling in Windows is set to be different sizes. Now I'm talking about the scaling, I mean you right click on the desktop, you choose the monitor that you're using, and you change this thing. If you're on a 4K screen, that's probably going to be set to about 200, otherwise your text is going to look really, really small. Now, one of the things about Quick Titler is that if you save it as a regular Quick Title file, then when you move this title from here onto a screen which is scaled a different size, it changes the title. Everything suddenly gets smaller. Now, I'm moving around between machines, so this could be a problem. Rather than save it as a regular title, an ETL title, I'm going to come here, go to File, and then Save As. And down Save As Type, I'm going to choose ETL2. They introduced ETL2 a couple of years ago, and it gets around this whole scaling problem. So if you move from machine to machine to machine, these things stay the same size regardless of the scaling. They haven't made it the default, because apparently there's a couple of problems in some language. I've never come across them, and I'm using ETL2 all the time. I'd love it if I could just make it the default and use it all the time, but I can't, so I actually have to make sure I specifically save it as an ETL2 file. So having done that, I'll just give it a name. Let's call this, it pops up and says, oh, do you really want to save that? Yes, I do, thank you very much. Now there we are, I've got the first one up there, but you'll notice, of course, it does not have the nice slanty edge of the other one. Now to get that, because I can't chop the edges off in Quick Titler, I'm going to add a mask. So let's go to the list of effects, video filters, mask, and drag it and drop it. Now I want this mask to happen before anything else. If I start moving this around, and I'm going to move it around using the layouter, I want the mask to move with it. So I've got to put the mask at the top of my list of effects. So come down to the information window, drag mask and put it above the layouter. You're not seeing any difference at the moment because I hadn't even drawn a mask, but that's a very important thing. Make sure the mask is first. Let's just open it up, and here I'm going to want to create that slanty edge. So I'm just going to draw a mask. What I want to do is on the outside of that mask, I want to make it completely transparent. So I'm going to go to the outside here and drop that down to 0. And then suddenly you'll notice, oh look, I've got a slanty edge to it. And if I zoom in on the mask using this magnifying tool, if I wanted a curvy edge there, what I could do is add a few more points in. I am going to go to the little arrow in the corner, click on it, and say Add Vertex, and stick another point on there, and stick another point on there, and there, and there. Then I'm going to go back to Edit Shape, and let's just move that one down there, that one up there. And there we are, you can see I've now got a bit of a curvy edge on there. You'll notice my original points here don't have these extra handles. So here you can see on this particular point I've got a little couple of round dots there and the actual point in the middle. That's because when I clicked on the original ones, I just clicked and let go, and it put in a sharp edge. If you click and drag a bit, then you get these Bezier handles. And with the Bezier handle ones, you can make curvy edges. The more you drag those handles out, the curvier the edges will be. Now, having set that one up, I'm going to go and take this and set the others up as well. I'm going to need 2 of them. So the simplest thing is going to be to take a copy of that and then adjust the copies. I just grab hold of it, start dragging, don't let go of the mouse, hold down on the control key and let go, and it makes a copy. Let's do it again. Start dragging, control, let go, copy. I've now got the same thing 3 times. I'm going to go to the second one here. Let's make it this green bar here. I'm going to want a box that's exactly the same height as this box. Now, I can't select the box at the moment, so I've got to come up to the little arrow and click on that, and then I can select the box. And I want to take that box and make it bigger, but I don't want to make it taller. Now, I could just grab hold of it and drag and hope, but instead I'm going to come up to here and go to the width, and then just start dragging on the width here. It's going to make the whole thing longer, but not higher. So it's exactly the same height as the other one. I now want to sample the colours. So again, I'm going to use the same 2 slots, but this time I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to sample the little green from the top, and click on that one, and sample the green from the bottom. And I'm going to just come up to the X thing here and drag on the box just to move it across. All that is just making sure that it's exactly the same height and position as the settings one, so it's nicely lined up without having to faff an awful lot. I now need to grab the settings words, and instead of calling it settings, I am going to call it how to make this title in Qt. I like my ins to be a bit smaller, so I'm just going to select that, shade it in, and knock the size down. Okay, so now I've got a box with those words in it. I now need to save that. If I come up to File and then Save, it's going to overwrite the settings one. So I'll lose my settings one. So I want to do a save as. I could do a save as, and I could call it something like how to make this title in Qt, or I could just do an auto save as, and it will save it with a new name, which I'm going to do. So there we are, new title in there. Oh, I can't see it. Why can't I see it? Well, that's because it's also got the same mask on as the settings title, which means it's only showing this bit of the picture. So I need to adjust the mask to match my new title. So that's pretty easy. I'll just open the mask up. So I need to take that, make it a bit wider and move it across. Simplest way to do that is I'm going to untick the ratio on the scale here. So there's a little padlock, and if I have that clicked, then if I make it wider, it makes the whole thing bigger. And I don't want to make it taller, I just want to make it wider. So let's just undo that, untick the padlock, and then I'm just going to grab the edge and make it wider. Then move it across, and then what I've got to do is come in here and adjust the curve at the front, because in making it bigger it made that curve longer, and I don't really want to do that. Go to the arrow, select Edit Shape, grab all of those 2 points and move them. So literally I just lassoed those couple of points and move both at once. So there we are, I now have got those 2 bits done. Let's go to the last one, which is the bottom one. Open it up. The bottom box down here is actually a little bit thinner, although it is the same colours. Take the settings words, and these words go down here, and they actually are. By the way, this box that I've got on here, where I've been typing in the words, you get to by going to View and choose Text Input Bar. Need to make it a little bit smaller and shove it in down there. I'm just going to do a quick save as on that. Let's call it DVC Training. Now I don't need the reference, so let's move that out of the way. And there we are. I've got, oh, of course, I haven't got my DVC Training still, because the mask needs to be adjusted for DVC Training as well. Let's go in there, whack the mask down there, and instead of fiddling around with the shape here, I'm going to go up to Edit Shape, select those points at the back, and just drag them across the screen and off. So there you can see I've now got my shape at the bottom. If you go back to the original, it flies in, so that takes about a second for it to fly in. DVC Training and the settings words, they actually fly in off the left. My actual title on the lighter green flies in from the right. So it takes a second to fly in, sits there, and then it takes a second to fly off again. So I'm going to go to a second in. I'm going to type 100. I know where a second is. And I'm going to set up some of these moves. So let's first of all go to, say, the DVC Training one. I'm going to open up the layouter. This is where I want it to finish. So I'm going to turn on keyframing, click there, and put a keyframe in so it's now fixed at the right place where I want to finish. Then I'm going to move back to the start, and I'm just going to literally drag it off screen. And again, using the numbers, I'm only dragging in the X position. That makes sure it doesn't wobble up and down a lot. It goes on a straight line out. So you can see from that, now that flies in. Go to the very end, and I am going to now type -100. I'm inside of Layouter, but because I've got the timeline selected, because I've dragged around here, as soon as I start typing, it puts in something down there where it says current. But minus in, -100. That jumps me back a second. So I now know I'm a second from the end of the title. Very quick to do that when you know what you're doing. I'm going to stick a keyframe in there, which means that basically it flies in, sits there, and currently does nothing. But if I go right to the end, I want it to fly off again. I want to go to exactly where it was when it started. So all I'm going to do is select the keyframes at the start, Control C, Control V, and paste them at the end. So you can see there, comes on, sits there for 4 seconds, then flies off again. That's got the first one done. Now I've got to do exactly the same on the other two. Since they're going to do practically the same movement, all I'm going to do is copy that layouter onto the other two. So make sure that's selected, and you can see its layouter here in the information window. Then select the other two. Drag the layouter from the information window onto them. Now they should have copied the same movement on all of them, which they have. Of course, the how to make this title in Qt thing, the light green one, that's not right, is it? Because it's going in from the wrong direction. But at least I've set the final position up, but I can now change that. I'm going to go to that one, select it, open the layouter, go back to the start, and let's just drag it off the other way. There, go to the end, and I'm just going to copy that to the end. That's actually got that one sorted out. Do the same for the settings. I mean, the settings actually comes in from the right direction and sits there, but in my original you'll notice they're all coming in at different speeds. So I need to adjust the settings one. Let's go to that one. Grab hold of it and again change the position until just before the word settings appears, which is there. And then go to the end and just copy those over. So because DVC training's got a lot further to travel, it goes a bit faster than the word settings. But they all come together in the end. Now looking at that, pretty happy with everything. Not quite happy actually with the mask on the light green one. So let's just pop into the mask here, adjust it. When I'm fiddling with masks, and I do a lot of masking EDIUS because I actually find the tools very useful and simple. When I'm doing a mask, what I like to do is remember these keyboard shortcuts for swapping between things. So V will select a shape. A will let you edit the shape. E lets you fiddle with a control point. So say this control point here is not a curvy one, it's a straight one. I can click on that and it turns it into a curvy one. Click on it again and it turns it into a straight one. A, back to editing. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I think that looks a bit better. The other thing about them is they've got a kind of embossy look on them. Let me just go back into Quick Titler, pick the box, come down in the list of properties and find emboss. Click on that. Now I want to change this title. I don't want to save it under a new name, so I just got to click on the X and get out of it. Then I pop into the other ones and do exactly the same thing. So select it. Yeah, there we are, like that a bit better. Right, so we have them flying in. Then we have these two lens flares flying across it. Now this title was originally made in VizTitle, which has got lens flares built in. New Blue Titler Pro and EDIUS don't have lens flares. I can't use either of them to put the lens flares on it. So to get around that, I just went off to a picture program and I made a lens flare. Literally, this is a standard regular lens flare. And I'm going to pop it on the top. Now it starts about 1 second in and it stays there until about 5 seconds, which is there. And there we are. I've now got a lens flare. I've just got to animate it, which of course I'm going to do with the layouter. My original title, they're a bit squished. So I'm going to go and make these a bit squished, literally by unclicking preserve aspect ratio and squishing it. Now when it starts, it appears here, flies across the title and then comes off. So all I've got to do is set a keyframe at the start, set a keyframe at the end, and then at the end I've just got to move it across, like so. So now I have a lens flare flying across the top. Then I want to fade it in and fade it out, which obviously I could just do with a fade or with the bar along the bottom. To keep it on in the same program, I'm going to pop to 1 second in here and I'm going to go down to source and stick a keyframe on source. So that's at 100%. Pop back to the start and take source down to nothing. So this controls how transparent whatever your layoutering does. Let's go to the end. So at about 3 seconds, because the whole thing's 4 seconds long, I'm going to stick in another source keyframe. Now I could come down, find the source in here, which is under opacity, and then click this little button. Or another way of doing it is just wiggle it, move it out and move it back again. As soon as you make a change on this, it puts in a keyframe. Then pop to the end and move the source down to nothing. So there we are. I have now got my nice little fadey up and fadey down lens flare, number 1. I now need to stick another one of those in because there's 2 of them. There's one going along the top and there's one which is travelling along the top of DVC training. So to do that, what I'm going to do is duplicate this title. In EDIUS, if I duplicate that entire track, it'll duplicate anything that's on that track. So the easiest way to do all this is right-click on the track header and say duplicate. Sticks in another title of exactly the same type on a new track, exactly the same length, with the layouter on it. And all I've got to do is change the Y position. So I'm going to select it, open up the layouter. So the Y is the up and down, the X is the left and the right. Now there's loads of ways of doing this. The obvious way would just be to go to the start, pick it up and move it. But because it's faded out, I'm kind of guessing where it is. I could get rid of my fade and then put the fade back on afterwards, but there are lots of simpler ways around it. Now one of them is open up position in this list of stuff and turn off keyframing for the Y position. Now it doesn't change it, it's still in the same place, but then if I stick it to a bit where I can actually see the title and move it, it will move it downwards. It's now in the right place over the top of DVC training. Of course I've still got to fiddle with the X position because I want it to move the other way, but possibly the easiest way of doing that is to grab hold of the keyframe for the start and the keyframe for the end and swap them around. So I've now got my 2 lens flares on there. Now this is the new blue version of the title. Like I said, new blue does not come with lens flares. So actually I did exactly the same thing in the new blue titler. I took some lens flares and stuck them in the title and keyframed them going across it. Final thing, actually these are a bit greener in my original. So I'm going to go in here and grab one of these colour effects. For this I'm going to use the colour wheel. And I'm going to use the colour wheel because it's just an easy way of changing things like colour, or overall colour. And I'm going to grab hold of the wheel and move it around. And I'm going to change it around till it's a colour that I quite like. I can add a bit more colour into it. So this little dot changes the saturation. I can make it very colourful, I can put it back to regular colour, I can even make it black and white. But I'm going to just do that because I quite like that look now. It's just slightly different to the original. And of course I need to make the other lens flare the same colour, so I'm just going to grab the colour wheel effect and drop it on that one. So now I have got 2 lens flares and my title all coming in quite nicely. Might be a good time to save it. The only other thing is the way it comes in. Now if you look at the new blue titler, I've put the motion blur on in new blue titler, and it is blurred, but actually it's not very pleasant. Look at the Viz title version here, and the motion blur on there is nicer. I would like to have some motion blur on these words coming in. So the obvious thing you would think, let's go up to the effects and find the motion blur effect and dump it on there. If I double click on it and open it up, and I'm really just interested in the moving bit, so let's set an in and out around that. Now remember, I've put this on the DVC training one. I'm going to loop play it, and then I'm going to fiddle with this slider and see if I can get a motion blur look that I like. And that's not bad. It's not as good as the Viz title one, but it's not bad. And actually the way I did the motion blur in my own titles was not that at all. I cheated. I used a Gaussian blur. So let's take the Gaussian blur and whack it on there. Makes it incredibly blurry. Double click to open it up. I'm going to stick it back to 0 so it's not blurry at all. I'm going to unlink the little chain here. I want to put a horizontal blur on this. I don't want a vertical blur because it's coming in from the side. It's not moving up and down. The other thing I want to do is I want it to start off blurred when it stops moving and when it just stop. So I'm going to stick a keyframe in by just the same as the layouter. Clicking on that, clicking on here to put in a keyframe, put the blur to 0 at that point. And a little bit before it, while it's still moving, I'm going to whack it up to something. Now let's try. What does it look like with actually a really high blur on it? That's not bad. Now if I think that's a bit much, I could just pop back to this keyframe and adjust it. You can only adjust it in 1 whole increments by dragging this slider, but if you come down to this thing down here next to the keyframe, and I select that, I can drag it in very, very small increments. 1.5, 1.6, 2.1. and so on, which was something they added in sometime during EDIUS 9. It just means you can do a much, much more subtle blur. And there's tons of times when I use this Gaussian blur now, not just for things like this, but also taking some CG stuff and just subtly blurring it so it looks like video footage. And it's the only way I can do it in EDIUS, using the Gaussian blur and changing it in very small increments there. There we are, quite happy with that. And then right here, it's going to start moving again. So what I want to do is stick another keyframe in there at nothing, and then another keyframe just a couple of frames later after it started moving, which matches this one. So I'm going to select that, copy, paste. There we are, I've got a kind of motion blur. What I want to do is use the same motion blur on the others. So again, make sure you've got this one selected. You can see it in the info window. Select the other 2, drag it and drop. You've now put the same motion blur onto all of them. I think that motion blur faked in EDIUS is better than the one that I'm getting out of New Blue Titler. EDIUS out, New Blue Titler in. I have now got a template for all of my titles to be used inside of EDIUS. I'm going to go to the bin, and I am going to make up a new bin, and I'm going to call it QT, and I'm just going to right click on that and add it to the bin. It's called Sequence 3, let's change that. I'm going to triple right click on the tab and call it Main Title Template. And now I've got a title that I can use over other sections of the tutorial. Now to reuse this again and again, let's go in here. I'm going to grab hold of one of my different bits of video, and all my sections actually start about a second in, and I put a cross dissolve on that. I've got a whole bunch of filters I use all the time, so I've made my own little folder up and shoved them in there. And then I'm going to take that title that I've just made and put it over the top. Now I want to keep the main title template, and I want to reuse it. So rather than shove that straight onto the timeline, I'm going to right click on it in the bin and say duplicate sequence. Don't think of copying and pasting it. It doesn't make a copy. It just makes another instance of exactly the same thing. Choose Duplicate Sequence. I'm going to drag that, drop it onto the timeline, and obviously I've now got that title popping across the top. I am now going to double click on it to go into it, and the words I need to change are this bit. DVC training and settings stay the same. It's the bit in the middle. So I'm going to double click on it, double click on the text, Control A just to select everything. I'm going to type the second title. All I have to do, so I can reuse all this lot all the time, is just to come up to here and go File, and then either Save As or Auto Save As. Don't save it, just do a Save As. Simplest thing is Auto Save, then you don't have to name it. Let's go back to sequence 3. There we are, the second title. Then I do my next sequence, again, drag another thing down here, make it 1 second in, blah de blah. And I now need to get another title to go over the top of that, so I come up to main title template here, right click, duplicate, pop the duplicate down here, open it up, double click on this, double click on the words, Control A to select them, File, Auto Save As. Back to this one, I've now got the words aspect ratio in there and the whole thing's being reused. But there we are, a totally animated reusable title. All done in Quick Titler and EDIUS. I'm not saying you can do everything in Quick Titler that you can do in the other programs. Obviously, New Blue and VizTitle can do 3D. VizTitle in particular can do particles. It can do subtitle. It can do lots of other things. There's lots of very, very good reasons to buy VizTitle, but there is actually quite a lot you can do with Quick Titler. Other important things to bear in mind, if I go into this title, all my titles are on video tracks. You can't do all this stuff if they're on title tracks. On title tracks, I wouldn't be able to move it around with the layouter, I wouldn't be able to put the Gaussian blur on, and I wouldn't be able to put masks on. So these are all on video tracks, they're not on title tracks. And another little thing worth mentioning is that for all of these things here, I combined the box and the words into one thing. Didn't have to do that. Let's say take the words here, and I'm going to just do a quick duplicate of that. So I've now got the words in there twice. Go into one of them, select the box and get rid of it. No box. Auto Save As just to make sure I don't mess up the other ones. Go into the second one, select the words, get rid of them. Auto Save As. They've got the same layouter on them, they've got the same Gaussian blur on them and so on. You know, every time I was going through and changing these titles all the way through the project, I was just changing the words. Everything else stayed the same. I'd be using the same background box through all of them. So what I could do is go to that background box and just change the colours. Choose, say, a bit of a pink one up there, and a bit of a dark burgundy one there, maybe. Now, coming out of that, instead of doing an auto save as, I'm just going to do a save. So imagine I'd started this, and this box was always separate to the words. So in other words, I'd done each item as a separate layer. So every title would actually be using that box, because every time I duplicated the title template and used it, I only changed the words, which means I change the background of that and save it. It changes the colour of that box in every single title. So that's another thing you could do with it. You could have a template, but then you could change the colours of all the boxes, because all the boxes would reference the same Quick Titler title. And you can do a lot just using EDIUS's built-in effects and using Quick Titler. So, for example, this screen here that you can see is entirely done in Quick Titler. It's made up of lots of different elements, so you've got all these background boxes, some flashing lights on them, all of these separate little elements put together, the text scrolling up the screen, again just quick titles scrolling up the screen with different boxes in them, and then in the middle some images which have just been put up on the screen as separate still images. And then that is itself put in the background with other stuff layered on top of it. But all of that is actually done with Quick Titler. And I just use Quick Titler to make the boxes, and then use the layouter and the Gaussian blur to blur them up a bit, maybe glow them a bit, and move stuff around. Now normally that sort of thing I would probably pop off into a compositing program, but actually for what I was doing, it was easier to do it in my editing program, because I could just go in and tweak little bits of it to match different shots as I'm going through without having to go into a compositing program, because it looked just as good inside of EDIUS as it did in a compositing program. So I hope you found that useful. The new version of my tutorial, which includes a completely updated audio section, an updated section about EDIUS settings, and also some new stuff about EDIUS 10, That will be available in a couple of weeks off of my website, www.dvctraining.co.uk. If you bought the tutorial recently, then you'll get a free update, or if you've got an old version, you can get a discount. So pop to my website if you want to know more information about that. Hopefully I'll be back soon with some more tutorials. Obviously over the pandemic I haven't done that much, but I'm planning to do a few more now about some of the new EDIUS 10 stuff and other little interesting things that I found out using EDIUS over the years. Don't forget you can email me for support, david@dvctraining.co.uk, or I can do remote support through the internet where I look at your machine, try and sort out problems. But you can find out more information about all of that from my website. Anyway, I'll see you next time.